Cloud. All right. Okay, this is a regular meeting of the Norwich Planning Commission. We have approved the agenda as written. This is our organizational meeting, so for
We need to click, got it.
Oh, yeah, I always have to do that.
yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
So for the time being, I am not the chair. I am just helping us run the first few minutes of this meeting. So at this point, I will help us entertain motions for the position of chair.
I nominate Jan Losper for chair.
A second.
All right, moved and seconded. Do we have any other, I think because it's a kind of an open position, are there any other nominations for chair? Okay. All those in favor of Jan Losper as chair?
Hey, Jan, how about discussion?
Oh, sure, we can have some discussion.
Yeah, I just want to note, I think you've done a fantastic job and you're helping us get back on track. I much appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm willing to give it a go for another year. All right, all those in favor?
I would like to say, and I agree with Jeff.
Okay. All right, we will call the vote. All those in favor of the chair as nominated? Yeah.
Aye.
1, 2, 3.
Aye.
All right, thank you all. We'll take it from there. We now have a chair to run the meeting. I will accept nominations for vice chair. Hearing none, I would nominate Jeff Goodrich as for vice chair, if he's willing to serve.
Second.
Okay, are there any other nominations for vice chair? All right. All those in favor of Jeff Goodrich as vice chair for the coming year?
Aye.
Aye. All
I
right.
abstain.
All right, accepted. All right, moved and passed, Jeff as vice chair. We now have one more order of business, which is clerk.
I nominate Vince.
Second.
Moved and seconded Vince Crew to be our clerk for another year, and I hope our digital assistant on the ground at Tracy Hall, which has been greatly appreciated. Any other nominations for clerk? All right, all those in favor of,
Discussion.
all right, we'll take discussion.
Yeah, I think Vince has done a great job despite his engineering difficulties with spelling and grammar.
Given, we've got a few of us in the crowd, so that's a handicap for a lot of us. All right, all those in favor of Vince as the secretary clerk, I think we call it officially, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. All right, now we have officers. Thank you. I would like to welcome Christian into the fold here. I've had a one-on-one conversation with him just to get his feet wet a little bit. And as he put it, he will, he's very much wants to be a working long-term member of the commission, but wants to take it slow and come up the learning curve. So if he's quiet and not volunteering left and right, it does not mean he's not going to do it soon. So welcome to Christian. All right. I'm going to continue with the organizational meeting here for a couple topics, because I'd like to use it as a method of reset and really kind of remind ourselves and anybody participating or watching the video later how we do business and by what rules. So first, on the meeting decorum topic, I guess I'd call it, we've said it before, and I want to restate it. We need to have respectful not personal, not historical grievance kind of conversations. Please stay on topic. We will always have plenty of things on the agenda, so ask yourself as you're talking, does this apply directly to the agenda topic? And then I would encourage people to use points of order as process devices to hold our feet to the fire, whether that's for respectful conversation or items off the agenda. A point of order goes to the fore of the conversation stops, and we have to address the point of order. So that is a tool we can use to keep ourselves honest and on track. Any other thoughts on meeting decorum? Jeff?
Yeah, Jan, procedures and policies, since you're on the decorum thing, I want to talk about the bylaws, Robert's rules, Dylan's rule, et cetera.
Yeah,
This is-
I have that next. So let's finish up with meeting decorum if there are any other comments, and then go to those other procedures. Any other thoughts on meeting, just how we behave, so to speak? Okay, so on the procedures and policies, again, I want us to reiterate, remind ourselves the rules that we operate under. And it does come down to, first and foremost, really, it's, well, Vermont state law, but then there are the bylaws of the Planning Commission. And the bylaws state that at this meeting, the clerk will read the bylaws unless everybody promises they have recently read them or they will soon read them. Now, I don't necessarily think it's our time best spent to read through them word for word, but I do think it's an important topic to put on the table because everything else flows from that in terms of open meeting law, Robert's Rules of Order, conflict of interest policy. Those are all embedded in our bylaws. So do people have comments around the bylaws? Ernie?
Yeah, I would you mind saying where you find them?
They have, for any new members, Pam should send them out to them. That's part of her requirement for new members. So clearly you can always get them from Pam. I believe they're on the website. The ones I have actually have and which would have been what Pam gave me a year ago, have the conflict of interest policy tacked on the end. So it's about 3 pages of our bylaws and then that policy. So I'm happy to send them to everybody, but certainly officially, if they're not on the website, they should be. So we can look for them and make sure that Pam has them on there.
I could also include a link or something in the minutes if we all have consensus to read them, and then have a link to show that that's what we are going to be reading.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And then we can make sure we'll have a link there. We'll have a link we'll make sure there's a link on our webpage. But it does then roll around to the some of the topics like Robert's Rules of Order. That's a given. We're more or less formal about it in these full PC meetings as needed, really, by the demands of the meeting. The open meeting law clearly applies to all our subcommittees. We now have a subcommittee policy that we have passed and therefore need to abide by. I have, when we talk about subcommittee process, I'll give a quick report on the recent select board meeting and that conversation about subcommittee process. Jeff, question to you, because you brought it up a while back. The the request or the idea was, should we put the bylaws on a future agenda item for comment and or any editing that might be needed? At the very least, I could see adding the subcommittee policy referenced. And there's also some things about how the minutes have to be done within 3 days rather than 5 days from open meeting. And it may be worth going through, but I don't know what your thoughts were.
Jan, I might add a couple more things, but yeah, at a future, on a future meeting agenda, I think it would be good to do that.
Okay. Any other procedural topics? And maybe, I mean, Christian or anybody who's been new or watching us, is questions that come up. For example, we had a question, I think, Mary, you asked it. How does the agenda get set, for example? And that theoretically comes from the bylaws. And in the bylaws, under organization of meetings, number 3, at each meeting, all members may contribute suggested items for the next agenda. Chair, vice chair, and clerk will prepare a draft agenda based on member input and any other pressing business that arises following the meeting. The clerk will furnish each voting member with the draft agenda for the next meeting, with the minutes of the last meeting and any pertinent documents due for discussion at least 3 days before the meeting. So there are a couple things like that we should clean up. We obviously have to do the minutes well before the packet. And the 3 days is not accurate for both what we tell people to be ready for the packet and the 5 days for a regular meeting warning.
Jan, is the intention that the planning commission sees the agenda before it's shared publicly?
That has not been the way it has gone. Typically the last thing I do after kind of collecting all the pieces and just making it reasonably pretty is I'll send it to Jeff, or the chair sends it to the vice chair and says, am I missing anything? What do you think? Is this good?
Okay.
So one more set of eyes sees it, but not the entire group.
Okay, so it gets sent to the public, the planning commission when it gets sent to the public.
Yes, when it.
Okay,
If that's what's currently been happening. It is in line with our bylaws, other than it says the clerk will be involved, not just the vice chair and chair. And I think Pam plays a couple of the roles that are called out in the bylaws for the clerk. Shall post and draft, shall post draft minutes, that kind of thing. So I think it's worth asking the group, and maybe as we get into the next topic, which is goals and priorities, it's a good idea to think about how we set the agenda and how we make the best use. If we want to be meeting once a month for the regular meetings and then doing our kind of detailed work in subcommittees, then we need the right agendas for those regular monthly meetings. And so does the current process have us do that? Jeff?
Yeah, this is one of the things, Jan, I'd like to talk about with the bylaws, because while my perception of the planning commission, since you've been chair, tries to incorporate, you're trying to incorporate any comments from planning commission members on the agenda. My previous 5 years didn't reflect anything like that. So perhaps we amend the bylaws to contemplate something like what Mary addressed, where the agenda goes out to the PC. Here it is. And we're not going to violate the OML if individual PC members say, well, remember this, remember that, to you, Jan. So personally, the more input from planning commission members we can have, the more I would appreciate it.
Okay. Is that, do others generally feel like that's a good idea? I think 2-step process. We can change how we do things immediately, and then we can revise the bylaws to reflect. But if people like that idea, then I'm certainly happy to work with Vince and Jeff to give us, is that something where a day or two is sufficient? Because what happens is if you add stuff to the agenda, you need to add, you sometimes likely need something for the packet.
Yep.
So to be kind to Pam, you can't add things to the agenda and packet at the last minute.
Right.
So that's probably 2 days, 1 day minimum to say to the whole group, here's the agenda. And yes, the open meeting law allows that. Setting the agenda is one thing that can be discussed outside of the warned meeting. So if there's agreement on that, then we'll do that going forward, and we'll put a review of the bylaws on the agenda. Is that because part of this is a prioritization exercise. So there's on the agenda, which I keep a running list of just topics for the agenda for some future agenda. And then there's on the next agenda. So if we're talking agenda, it's useful to say which category people think that's in. Is it important enough or pressing enough that it needs to be on the next agenda? I'm not seeing hands to jump, so I'm gonna leave review bylaws as future agenda item, but
Yep.
not a must-have for next meeting. Okay,
Agree.
okay, good. Thank you. And then Vince will put the link in, and we'll get a live link on the web. So then under goals and priorities, and this is
Hey,
another.
Jan, before you
Yes,
get
Jeff.
there, you mentioned conflict of interest. I mentioned Robert's rules and Dylan's rule. Are those things that might be added via link as well?
Yeah, so I'll check with Pam, and Vince, you can check with the link that you use. Like I said, my copy of the bylaws, which would have been what Pam sent out, has the conflict of interest policy at the end of it. And then when this is actually, yeah, there it is. So it has actually state statute, Title I, Chapter 5, about conflict of interest, and then it has the Town of Norwich conflict of interest policy. So those are all one document that we can link to as a bundle. Then it doesn't say anything about Dylan's, which is important, and it'll come up again as we talk about the select board's comments. I saw you sent a 3-point summary, Jeff, and I want to get to it when we're talking about the subcommittees. I checked on the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. They had a informational blurb about it, which had the same slightly different wording, but the same 3 points as you did about the powers of a local government in a Dillon state. So we could link to something like that, the VCLT resource page about Dillon's rule, because I'm sure somebody listening to the select board meeting last week heard a whole lot about Dillon's rule, and people would have said, huh? I don't know, what are they talking about? So we want to make that available.
Well, Robert's rules as well, Jan. I'm not aware that we have a link to Robert's rules, but for instance, once a motion's made and seconded, we have to engage the motion accordingly. My experience prior to your arrival is that we had about 5 years with planning commission members who would not engage in Robert's rules.
Yep, which is, and actually there's a a subset A through I of Robert's rules in the bylaws about things must be seconded, no more than 2 motions. Motion to table requires that, so they're the highlights of Robert's Rules of Order are actually embedded in our bylaws. But yeah, I think so. My note is, and Vince, if you can get this, is to get links to all of the things we've been talking about in one place on the.
Jan, I just forwarded to
PC
you
website.
the document that Pam had sent to me when I joined the planning commission, and that has all the links that we're discussing. So so anyways, it's in that document. So no need to hunt for it.
Okay, good. And we'll just make sure, if she sent that out, then chances are they're on the website, but let's make sure that it may be something. It has
Yeah.
a little new member packet that isn't readily available on the website. Okay. Anything else on organizational procedural issues before we go to kind of a broad goals for the upcoming year conversation? Okay. So that's how we do business, and I think, we try to be as informal as possible, but still get our work done. So that's the way I look at it, and if we're behaving ourselves, then we're allowed a little freedom. All right, goals. And this is one where probably clearly it's an agenda item. But I thought it was useful at the organizational meeting to start the conversation. And I think, Chris Clement said it towards the end of last year, and it was correct. We've been slogging through various things for a number of months, and you want to feel progress and completion and some successes. And so we want to be judicial about our priorities and the work we're going to try and take on. If I think about it, and we say that we have regular meetings and then subcommittees, the subcommittees should tell us a lot about our priorities for the coming year. If that's where the meat of the work is happening, then that should tell the world, and it should tell us what our priorities are. So right now, that means affordable housing, solar siting or energy planning, and just starting on capital planning. So thoughts on how to better prioritize, how to set our goals for the coming year? I would just open that topic up.
Well, I
Jeff?
think one thing I would, sorry.
Jeff, sorry, Mary. Jeff, then.
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay,
I'm
thanks.
fine.
So I think we started in the solar committee to really take a good look at the town plan. And in the solar planning notes, you can see, and Jan, I assume everybody has access to that. It was in the documents, the edits that we proposed and shared with the public and invited the public to comment on about how to adapt the plan to make sure that it has the regulatory kind of teeth authority that we think that the committee will have to decide what we think it needs, but to try to make those edits. So I think that's important work to continue.
Yep. How about, I agree. I think the solar siting group is really right in the middle of a pretty dense piece of work. How about, for example, so then affordable housing is on the other side. It's a longstanding group with one PC member that has a grant application in for a specific project. For me, at least personally, I would love to kind of get a reset to what else do they have on their plate? Who are the members exactly? How do they see their priorities? It's almost a pulse the subcommittees to say, what are your priorities for the next quarter or two. And so I would see doing that to affordable housing. And then capital planning is just getting off, and we need to talk through later in the agenda, members, lead, charter, and so forth. What about say affordable housing? Is that something that Jeff, you're the member there? How would you see that subcommittee's work?
So Jan, what Mary just mentioned was the town plan. And if I take that at face value, so the question to me is priorities for us. We have town plan, zoning, subdivision, and then our subcommittees support the aforementioned. So in terms of town plan, I think the solar siting committee has done some great work, but it would be pretty simple to engage the RPC, Two Rivers, annually to say, okay, how have the rules changed? How do we need to look at our town plan and incorporate things like what the solar siting committee has done so that we can advance. This is a subset of the town plan, if you will. We can advance the town plan changes that we're proposing to the select board, which has the authority to adopt or not adopt, and there are public elements, public hearing elements to that. So to me, I think town plan, I'm going to put it in a little TP, not a giant TP. I'm going to say it has a priority to me because the solar siting committee and the ongoing state changes warrant engaging the RPC for updates as needed. So let's put that as a priority, but we're not trying to rework the entire town plan. To me, I think before, how do I say this? Before we lost our staff member and past planning commission members, zoning was at the forefront of what we were talking about. So to me, it's possible that zoning may be one of our key priorities, particularly if we're thinking about affordable housing, middle income housing, et cetera. And then a spinoff from that would be our subdivision regulations. And for what it's worth, all of that has to be approved by the select board with public meetings, et cetera. So if we're talking about affordable housing, zoning's critical, subdivision regulations are critical. So I just want to separate that from the town plan in terms of how we look at each of these items.
Okay. How would you frame the status of the affordable housing subcommittee, their work, and then to your point, if that feeds into what we might do on zoning regs in the coming time period, how do we engage with that subcommittee to get some stuff done that needs to be done?
Yeah, and I'm not sure this is a subcommittee issue. The subcommittee has taken a look at what parcels are available in town, and colloquially, there ain't much. So in reverse, if our zoning said, here's how we're going to look at density increases, other things, which was before the planning commission, before things changed, before you came aboard, that might open up the gates, more opportunities for the affordable housing subcommittee. Right now, given our zoning, the affordable housing committee has very few options.
Mm-hmm. Would you see that that exercise to be a charter to that subcommittee? So would this group say, okay, we understand the constraints. We're not, if we think affordable housing is important, we want to look at potential zoning changes to encourage it. Would we give that back to the subcommittee as a charge? Christian?
I'm just new to obviously these subcommittees, this committee, but in my experience, it's worked best if this committee were to charge the subcommittee. So if the goal was to increase density, increase affordable housing, increase housing in certain areas, the charge would then go to the subcommittee to explore how to make that feasible, come up with a list of options, come up with thoughts, ideas to then bring back to this group. So I think the charge should be coming from here to the subcommittees, as opposed to the subcommittees generating ideas.
Yeah, so with respect to the subcommittee, these are all well-intended folks. I'm not sure, Brian and Jeff were both on the planning commission, but I'm not sure that the Affordable Housing Subcommittee understands zoning. I have no problem saying, to the extent that you can inform us with respect to how we might look at zoning changes, is it a subset I don't think it's a subset of capital planning, but is there a zoning subcommittee? Back in the 90s, we did 2 different subcommittees, the Planning Commission, the Rural Area Subcommittee, and basically the Downtown Subcommittee that resulted in our current subdivision regulations. And without getting into, I'd like to incorporate the public more and more in that process. The question is, what should our densities be? Because right now, if you look at our village designation, it's basically half-acre zoning. And then as you go out further, it's as much as probably 20-acre zoning. So how do we look at zoning with respect to the possibility of affordability? And I don't think that's necessarily the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, although I would encourage that subcommittee to offer input.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think it's a good question, where it brings up the idea of really what happens in the full PC, and then what happens in the subcommittees we have, and when is some kind of a working, another subcommittee or a different charge to one that we have warranted. But to Jeff's point, you need to give the task to people or groups that have the skills to do it. And that would be the point. So if we want to look at zoning options to encourage affordable housing, then we need to figure out what resources are out there and who do we have that's interested. You got to get interest, and then you got to get skills. And so that is one that right now, other than that Affordable Housing Subcommittee, isn't on our list per se. So I had asked the group, is that something we want to put on the list? And then we can decide priority.
Yeah, Jan, if I may, we've got some buildings downtown that could be multifamily. Multifamily means, 1 or more apartments in a building. And I believe downtown, we may have soil capacity for wastewater to accommodate that. Our regulations prohibit it. So to me, this is a key priority. How does our zoning comport with, and you could say hypothetically affordable housing, but it's more than that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good specific thought-provoking idea. Is that at this stage, I guess I'd ask, is that something we should leave in this group for a first round of discussion? Put it on an agenda item for a future meeting and talk about just that specific idea. And then if it needs a piece of dedicated work that the subcommittee is qualified to do, we can give it to them. But I like having things that specific. It makes us more likely to be able to make progress, and that's clearly a good idea to put on the table. Ernie?
I think this speaks to like one of the most important functions of a planning commission. Town, the density, population, however you want to look at it. And so I think that definitely needs to be discussed thoroughly and, have a proper subcommittee to look at it.
Okay. All right. So right now we're talking priorities for the coming year, so we don't have to solidify the details. Bob?
I guess I'll say we were sort of, I kind of take a different tack from Ernie, because I think with our experience on the land use subcommittee, I think that was sort of what I was anticipating we'd be diving into. And I think we had a few different, there were a couple different opinions on which way to go. And it became more of an exercise of walking through the town plan line by line. So I mean, maybe that's sort of what motivated my suggestion that we have a general charge to subcommittees when we form them, or a mission statement or something like that. But I like the idea of a very specific thing being brought up to talk about within the group as a first step. Because I think some of the energy can kind of get lost as people go in different directions.
Yeah. Jeff?
Yeah, to add to that, if I'm going to get specific, is when I look at the regional plan and the state's advocacy for growth centers, et cetera, village centers, town centers, the broader question is, where's our infrastructure? And this is my personal opinion, and I'm not advocating for, God forbid, density change. Nonetheless, factually, we do have infrastructure corridors that we should probably put on the agenda with respect to zoning, along with multifamily, that sort of thing. So my really dumb question, because I'm at that level, where's the infrastructure and how do we make use of it? And do we want to make use of it?
Mm-hmm. Christian?
I guess I think I hear a lot of good points. My question would be for the group is, so like order operations with subcommittee and this committee. With this group, the planning commission charge that we want to explore affordable housing, make it more available. So that's like the broad statement, mission statement. And then it would go to a subcommittee to explore ways that the exact things that Jeff is saying, like these are the barriers currently to that. And then that group we should make sure that group has the right people on it to explore, do a first round on what those barriers are, and then come back to the full committee. But I feel like that's typically a subcommittee committee.
I'd like to tackle this as a planning commission, Jan. I think our affordable housing subcommittee is trying to sink its teeth into individual projects as sites are available. They're not geared towards zoning and or land use regulations, but I think to the extent this planning commission can sift these elements, maybe we create another subcommittee.
Yeah. Mary?
Well, this is reminding me a bit of the conversation that the solar siting committee had, which was to think about, are there places that we should identify in town, rather than saying where things should go? So should there be, an industrial zone? Should there be a zone where we're looking at it for increased density housing? And so in that way, I think it is thinking about how does that align with the town plan, and having it think about being kind of a planning commission discussion here, and then potentially pushing it out. So I agree with Jeff's comment.
Yeah. And Christian, it'd be worth as I believe it's an appendix of the current town plan, is a pretty extensive housing study that was done, and then had a series of recommendations and actions, one of which was to explore town-owned properties for potential projects. And that's where, what they've been doing and where we got to this planning grant. So there's that background in terms of a broader housing study that then resulted in some specific ideas. But to Jeff's point, I think, which is accurate, it's more project oriented than zoning and land use oriented. And if we want to talk about infrastructure and densities and so forth, I think that sounds appropriate for the whole group, at least to start with. It's more of a policy conversation first. Okay, let's, if there are any other general thoughts for topics, I think that adds the affordable housing, but from the zoning point of view, adds another topic, big item on our agenda going forward. That's good. That's kind of what I wanted to ask the group for in this conversation. So we'll follow up with that in subsequent agendas. Anything else, thoughts, just going into the coming year? If we were to ask the question, if we look back at last year and look forward for next year, does anybody have any thoughts or brilliant ideas about what they want us to do differently or work on in particular? Here, yeah, Jeff?
Yeah, in the last year, help me, Jan, we, last year-ish, we discovered that we lacked files, data, et cetera. So I would say going forward, looking forward, let's make use of the data that we have. And similarly, to the extent we can inform our what's our hierarchy about hiring someone as a planner, a zoning administrator. I would like to continue in that vein. And I'm hopeful that collectively between us and the select board and staff, we've learned some things.
Yep. Yep. And agreed, certainly staff is still a priority, and as we said before, we need to do something differently to break that thing open. But that's clearly still on the list. Okay, let's park that in terms of 2024 plans, but keep it.
One other thing, Jan, we talked
Sure.
last meeting about capital planning. Is that something you want to put in, as an objective? Because that was
It's clear, yeah, and I think we'll
Okay.
have a chunk of conversation when we get to that in the agenda, because that's a real newly formed and only partially formed subcommittee. So we'll definitely talk about that. And it gets partly to Jeff's infrastructure. I think he was talking more about infrastructure we have, but the capital planning is also infrastructure you may want to build. Okay. So moving
Yep.
on.
Yeah, Bob.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Bob. Yep.
Sorry, this is just something more for like a general discussion of possible agenda item in the future, not urgency. But it's something I don't want to forget about. Prior to being on the committee, I remember Jeff talking a bit about the, I got to get the term wrong, the citizen rating. CRS.
Yeah.
Which,
Flood.
the flood preparedness element, and as I think about like maybe this isn't big sky daydreaming planning things, but metaphorically speaking, it's the, more the blocking and tackling that maybe we should be doing.
Yeah.
That's one that especially after last year in other towns around us, if that's a way we can contribute and do service to the town to prepare, in the event that something happens, that's something that's right in where we should be working. I at least want to bring that up, and maybe it doesn't need a committee. Maybe it's just a person or two doing some work, doing some legwork. I just want to bring it there or bring it up because, if that's something a project that can get, something I could throw in or other people are interested in and just get some updates as we go. It doesn't need to be a committee thing, but something I'd like not to forget. So.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, that's good.
Can I address that?
Yeah.
This whole CRS thing is fun for me. So I nerd out, and I'd be glad to work with Bob. I don't necessarily think what was presented to us as a staff member has to oversee it. I don't think that's true. That said, to Bob's point, how do we gain a higher percentage, 5 more percentage points on funding for flood damage? But I don't see this as up here with zoning or solar siting committee, but it can be something that's cooking. And
something going on.
Bob, if you can help me remember, I'd love to do it with you.
Sure.
Okay. Good. Just note that down, Vince. We'll grab them. Okay, so let's move on to its subcommittees as a block. And clearly this will always, I take this from an agenda point of view, subcommittees and subcommittee reports are a standing agenda item. In last time and this time, we have at the beginning process, subcommittee related process. So first, what I'd like to do is give you a quick update. I don't know if anybody stayed up late enough to watch the select board meeting this past Wednesday. where they talked about the handbook, the select board handbook, which has subcommittee policies in there. And there were really two items. One, the nub of it was, can groups, and at this point, I'm only talking about the planning commission, but it applies to some other town groups. Can the planning commission appoint members to a subcommittee that are not planning commission members? That is the question on the table. The proposal written in the first draft of that handbook was no, according to a very strict interpretation of Dillon's rule, which I think is pretty easily shown to be too strict. The statement was the select board are the only ones that can appoint members of subcommittees, and they have to be members of the main parent group. And so I argued pretty strongly that that was incorrect. It went against our subcommittee policy, that we felt our subcommittee policy was the right balance of getting town participation and still following all the rules. Dillon's rule clearly says that a group like the Planning Commission has the powers basically, we have what we need to do our job. And so if our job is to engage with townspeople to draft a town plan, and we say one of the tools we need to do that is subcommittees with town residents on them, that simple justification is easily pointed to as justified in a Dillon state. So I made that point to the select board. I just to give you the whole picture, I would say that three of the select board members made comments that sounded reasonable and supportive of what I was saying, like the select board doesn't have time to appoint all these members, and how would you possibly engage the public if you can only have subcommittees made up of planning commission members? And so I don't want us to think the select board is as a majority already pushing these ideas. Right now, it appears to be a minority, but that's how the discussion went. Jeff?
Yeah, and I think I just want to say, I appreciate the select board members. I don't understand where Marcia's coming from. Nonetheless, I appreciate her greatly. So I'm not going to say anything negative about any select board member. To me, Dillon's rule, the way it's was presented, at least in the minutes, makes no sense to me. Now, let me back up a little bit. To the extent the select board wants to appoint a subcommittee, great. The select board appointed a corridor committee because the improvements for Ledger Bridge, Foley Park, the bike lanes, everything all the way up by the green were critical to the select board. The select board appointed a bandstand committee. The select board appointed a bike ped committee. The select board's entitled to appoint whoever it wants. Point of order here is that in each of these committees, as I recall, there wasn't a single select board member present on any of those committees. Select board did intrude to say, at least in one case, the corridor committee, this is who the chair is going to be. So the notion that subcommittees have to be a function of the broader body has never, ever, and if I could say 37,000 more evers, been embraced by this community. Additionally, I think it's absolutely critical that we remember we've got like Affordable Housing Subcommittee, which is one of the best committees with respect to OML, even when the Planning Commission and the Select Board refused to adhere to OML. And I just want to be clear. So, you know, adherence to the rules isn't the problem with the subcommittee. It's been the problem with some of the higher elements. To me, the broader issue is how do we get the public involved? The more bodies we get involved, the better. And I'm not trying to just say that to ameliorate concerns about quorums. But just based on my experience in this realm since 92 or so, and previous to that through many communities, the more people we can get involved and participate in whatever context that is, in no way violates the notion of Dillon's rule.
Yeah. So I think right now it is that they didn't by any stretch approve the handbook. And they parked it for another read with some edits. The other thing that was in that, and you can go and look in the packet, it had a copy of what is an existing approved policy. I think it's 2018 or something, that is for the reporting and kind of supervising of other town groups by the select board that requires things such as quarterly reports from each town group to the select board saying what exactly you're working on and what are the deadlines and the projects, and that report is expressly not allowed to be the minutes. It has to be a separate report. So I said very clearly that seemed, the minutes are the perfect tool for that sort of thing. Why don't we just use them? But the point was, that is standing policy. It is currently on the books. And so, and again, there wasn't real driving support for it on the select board, but if they were cleaning up their handbook sort of things, they need to explicitly repeal that because it's currently on the books. Jeff?
Yeah, at the time I objected, and for largely the reasons that you're saying, because our minutes cover what we're doing. And oh, by the way, there was this paradigm in which select board members actually participated. They had a select board rep to the planning commission at a certain point. To me, it makes no sense. Nonetheless, if the select board is going to adhere to this quarterly reporting thing, then we're going to have to put it on our agenda each time to say, hey, folks, these are the 5 things we're going to do. The main issue for me is we don't have time to generate paper.
Right.
So if we've got to put it on our agenda, let's keep it as short and sweet as possible to do this frivolous reporting when our minutes, thanks to our secretary, cover in much more detail what we're doing.
Right, right. So as I said, I don't think, and even, I didn't hear anyone on the select board advocating. I said what I thought was wrong with that piece of it, that policy. Nobody was advocating for it. They were just saying, if we're not doing it, we should take it off the books. So we'll
Hey,
see
Jan.
how it goes. Yes, Jeff.
What I'm saying is we should put this on our agenda because our current hierarchy requires it of us at this juncture. So if we're going to adhere to the OML, we should adhere to this quarterly reporting.
Yeah,
If we're going to do the right thing, and I think this is the right thing, whether I agree that it's actually the right thing. But I hope that and I'm going to ask, I mean this with love and respect, let's put it on the agenda and keep it as short and daggum sweet as we can.
okay. I mean, I agree. I think the policy, to get back to our organizational conversation, the policy of this group is to follow the rules, whether they're state laws, OML, or, the town policies like conflict of interest or this reporting one. So we can advocate one way or the other, but the rules that are in place, we will follow them. So I think it's actually a good gesture to say, all right, if that's in place, how do we follow it? All right, we'll put that as a quick agenda item. So for right now, from a subcommittee process point of view, I think what I want to make sure to do, because this came up in the select board meeting where Pam had looked on the website and the website wasn't accurate. It still had the land use subcommittee on there. And so I want to make sure that we follow our policy, which means we have the correct and accurate list of the active subcommittees, who's on them, and they have charters that are linked to them. they should be right there on the website. So I'm happy to work with Pam on that. I would be happy to have another volunteer that said they would work with Pam on that, but we need the website to reflect the current status of our subcommittees. Ernie? I can't hear you.
Are you asking that somebody now?
I would be happy for a volunteer to say, I will work with Pam to make sure the website's accurate on subcommittees. If I don't hear one, I'll do it, but I'd be happy to hear a volunteer.
I'll work with Pam.
All right, very good. Thank you, Ernie. Okay, so let's jump into the meat of subcommittee report. I think we talked a little bit about affordable housing, but I guess, Jeff, it's not on the agenda here, but I would ask for maybe the next agenda when I will put affordable housing subcommittee as an agenda item for subcommittee reports. And then we would expect a report, which may be a paragraph on what's going on with the planning grant, or it may be you having talked to them, being able to give us a quick update, but we should get regular updates from our subcommittees. Jeff?
Yeah, Jan, thanks. I agree. Jeff Lubell's the chair, but sitting here, the Affordable Housing Committee, subcommittee, in addition to this grant effort, is also working with Vital Communities for a couple of outreach events, the housing breakfast, and then for the life of me, I can't think of the name of it. They've done a whole bunch. John Hafner and Vital Communities has done a bunch of effort on, bringing folks together about how to engage in housing. And Jeff and Brian, among others, have been supporting that.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, I saw an invite to some event as well. Yeah, so I think the legitimate thing, I will reach out to the chair of that subcommittee and say, we need a quick report for our next regular meeting and get in that cadence. Christian?
Just a suggestion as someone new who's been doing homework and clicking a lot of the links on the website. And you mentioned one of that they're not all accurate currently. It'd be good at practice probably if everybody followed the same, like the affordable housing is pretty well set up. And it has like strategy, then members, then meeting notes, then kind of miscellaneous helpful links at the bottom. They're kind of all over the place. Like some of them just have a running list of meeting notes with no links to what the like goals or priority areas are. So just a suggestion if for somebody new or public.
Can I ask you, Christian, since I agree, thank you, and that's very good to have a fresh set of eyes on clicking around that website. Can I ask you to work with Ernie and Pam to just point that stuff out? So take what you see when you click around and send those notes to Ernie and Pam and say, oh, well, hey, could you add some, ask the capital subcommittee for some goals and use that format, or, that would be very useful input.
Are people generally in agreement that the affordable housing is like a set up as a?
Yeah, Jeff, and I would say reach out to Jeff Lubell, who is the chair, has done a phenomenal job, in my opinion, along with other members, different secretaries between Paul Manganello and Brian, but I'm sure Jeff would inform this paradigm as well. He's done a great job.
Okay, so I certainly think consistency is valuable across the subcommittees. Just cite what it looks like, where you go find references and so on. And so if we can move towards that, that would be great. Okay, great. So I put capital first on the agenda, so we can take that one. The thing that's in the packet is simply for my own needs. I went through the VSAAs and sort of followed the daisy chain of capital planning as it related to the planning commission and what is the facilities and utility plan and which statute enables what. So that's just in there for information. I actually shared that with Brennan and Pam Smith to start that conversation. I did have a meeting with Pam and Brennan to talk about, and you asked me to do that at the last meeting, to reach out to the town manager and the chair of the select board, because clearly this is at least a three-way conversation with staff and departments, very involved, select board budgeting and policy, and then planning commission. How do you do a capital plan and get the planning elements? So I talked to them. Everybody was very supportive and in agreement that it needed to be a cohesive and comprehensive group. Pam's concern was that with the subcommittee, who can set members, who can set up groups, topic still not resolved. She was worried that if we jumped in and created a broad, large capital planning subcommittee, the members would be jumping into a hornet's nest if the kind of subcommittee membership question wasn't answered first. This meeting was before the select board meeting on the 8th. So we left it as, okay, let's see if the 8th will resolve that topic. And if it did, then we could go forward, sort of cleanly with the planning commission, talking about exactly what members we wanted to put into the big picture. The 8th did not resolve that cleanly. So that's where we are in terms of setting up the group. Jeff?
Yeah, so if the select board wants to set up a capital planning subcommittee, great, do it. So I would say, Jan, I'm not sure what the right word is, but or a way to frame this is, but say to Pam, hey, look, set it up. We're glad to participate. If not, we're going to do our own subcommittee. And we want to involve folks, select board staff members. And I'll tell you, after working with staff members in myriad towns, if I had a bunch of citizens that are going to help me put all this junk together, I'd be happier than a clam. I know I mixed a whole bunch of metaphors and I apologize for that.
So my question, I'm trying to think through this, because if I look and I think Mary said it simply at the last meeting, which was our thinking, that the planning commission's thinking about capital planning is to look at the town plan and say, what is it that the town is saying it wants to do in its town plan? What are the capital dimensions of those things? What do we need for capital and capital planning to achieve the goals of the town plan? And so as I'm trying to think through how to start this while still working out maybe some of the details of staff, select board, and exact membership, can we start with the more planning commission town plan elements of capital planning, get the thinking going, and then be ready to plug into the staff side of things and the select board side of things? And I'm not sure what exactly that means, but it's just a thought. Ernie?
Yeah, I'm gonna have a hard time actually explaining what I'm trying to say here. I mean, I'm looking at 24 VSA 4384, which it says, this whole thing is under capital planning now. Paying attention to being on the planning commission for a few years before the current constitution of it, it always seemed that the planning commission was sort of to come up with policies and relatively, I don't know how to say it, but sort of soft sorts of approaches to things. And this set of laws that you presented us with are really kind of flipping that on the head. I never thought in my life that the planning commission actually had something to do with the budgets, which is, capital planning. And here it's saying, oh no, the plan has to be executed by, how do they phrase it? Prepared by the planning commission. So this is a whole nother dimension, from my point of view, to the planning commission than I ever anticipated. Not that this is a bad thing. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. The planning commission's always in the past made up these policies and had these ideas, and this is what it views for the town in the future. And that's where it kind of ended, and working in the development review board, stuff was never particularly clear, with the town plan was not very clear, actually, and it left us grasping for straws when we were trying to make decisions, because the zoning and the regulations had conflicts and holes and all those sorts of things in them, and when we were trying to resolve those, we'd have problems. Now we have this is an observation. I guess I'm just trying to say this is an observation. I can be corrected. But I don't recall in the entire time I've been in the town of Norwich, which is a long time now, the planning commission ever being charged with anything that was financial. And maybe Jeff's been on the board long enough that maybe he's seen it, but I have never seen it before. And
Well, I know when Brennan brought to the meeting that we had, he had dug up, or he had looked for historic activities, capital planning, not even just with the planning commission involved, but anywhere. And it was pretty far back before there was anything. I can't remember the exact date, but it was surprisingly far back before there was anything that really looked like a capital planning process. Jeff?
Yeah, so I'd like to say probably mid-90s. So if I reframe this a different way, not looking back, but looking forward, because I look at, City of Lebanon, town of Hanover, even town of Hartford, about how they engage in the process, staff, select board, et cetera, city council, and then bounce things off planning commission for priorities, yada, yada, and with large matrices. So here I am back in an Excel spreadsheet. But if I said, okay, the planning commission wants to address this, maybe not as a subcommittee now, if we want to avoid conflict, which it doesn't chafe me at all. Bring it on, baby. But if we wanted to meet again in a couple of weeks and say, what does the capital planning include? So it's stuff like Vince and I started talking about, where are the sidewalks, where are the roads, what's the road infrastructure, where's the water, where's the sewer, where's the zoning, yada, yada. So I could see this group say for an hour, let's maybe put a limit on it. And if we go to the inn and drink beer, it's going to be even better. And I'm saying that tongue in cheek. What is it we're thinking about in terms of the municipal infrastructure? And to the extent we can involve Brennan or someone from the select board, great. Let's come and brainstorm about what that capital plan, what are all the elements? Tracy Hall's on the list. Marion Cross School's on the list. There are other things on the list. What are all the things that should be on the list? We can populate the matrix as we desire going forward. But right now, the question for me from a capital plan standpoint, if you said forest blocks, you could put that in a capital plan. How does that relate to it? You could put solar considerations in the capital plan. How does that relate to it? Sustainability as we go forward. These are all elements in our matrix that could populate our matrix. We could fill it out as we want going forward. But let's start by creating that matrix.
Ernie?
I was thinking, listening to Jeff and completely agreeing to start with, but it sounds like that. Earlier tonight, somebody talked about, I think it was Bob, talked about resilience. I think he used a different word, but it basically is the concept of resilience. And that actually is a really practical sort of application of, you know, I mean, planning commission's abilities. And I'm thinking that we might, just like we've started thinking, we started using the solar siting committee as a way of developing how to attack, to deal with the town plan and larger planning issues in general. It was sort of using that as a, not a dress rehearsal, because it's a real thing, but as a way of learning how to attack these kinds of things. I think resilience, because it deals with infrastructure and all these sorts of infrastructure, environmental, all kinds of other issues that the town regularly deals with, and you think of it as a public works issue or select board issue or something like that, based on the way I had previously perceived, until tonight, really, to be honest, perceived the planning commission. That would be another one of those things where we actually start practicing on how to do the work we're supposed to be doing. And since it's a kind of a new thing, I mean, solar siting kind of falls kind of like, it's familiar in a way, because it's kind of like land use in a way. It's related, certainly. Resilience is kind of different because it's so much more like public works issues. So that's a new thing for us to learn how to do. And I think I think we're gonna, we're gonna need to learn it, and, having something tangible to actually set some goals towards, and so on. I think that's a good place, because now we could, if we start thinking of resilience, we also have to start thinking of what it's going to cost and all those other, all the capital planning aspects of it. And I think that's something that
Mhm.
I don't think our mental muscles on this planning commission really are there yet, but I think we got to start getting that exercise.
Mm-hmm. What do people think, just to the idea that Jeff put out? I think it's a good one, and I'm going to ask kind of what's the right venue? A brainstorm the matrix. Let's get the list down. We could all list
Yep.
off, the Tracy Halls and all these things, the sidewalks, as a first exercise. If that's seems like a good idea, then is that something that we do in this group? Before, I'm just thinking that getting into the nitty-gritty of subcommittee members, subcommittee charter, it's a ball of wax already. Should we do a brainstorm as a way to get our feet wet first?
Yes.
What do people think? Yes.
I
Other-
agree. I think it's a brainstorm, and I think it's a call for information too, because, get public works. I mean, other people have, I'm sure, a list that would feed into this. And how do you create a master list
Mhm.
And I think,
and then
think also-
prioritize it?
I also think that that's the purpose of the planning commission. It's sort of the overall, we're supposed to have a view of the overall activities that are being undertaken on its behalf. Some of those will be, most of those it sounds like will be with subcommittees, and, might involve people that are not on the planning commission. I think sort of setting up the headings and getting what we're going to, the topics, however you want to phrase it, is a good way to start. And then we start dealing with subcommittees later, after we start really being able to work out which subcommittees should be
Yep.
doing what, how many
Yep.
we're going to need, which it's starting to sound like we're going to really need a lot.
Yeah, I think that is the point, because I don't want us to, I think the land use subcommittee fell down a little bit because it was too broad, and it wasn't chartered on a tight beam to fed into the subcommittee, and I don't want to do that. Capital is it could be such a large topic that
But it's very stringently focused.
it
compared to-
needs to be stated, needs to be clarified before we try to hand it off to more of a task-based group. Jeff?
Yeah, I want to offer very specific visual. Today, I was headed to a job site to jump in some test pits on off Route 4A. And when you go by the Baited Hook, the Lebanon side has this large expansive pavement with shoulders and this beautiful granite curb and concrete sidewalk. And then when you hit the Enfield town line, you got a 24-foot wide road with no shoulders. Now, I'm not saying good or bad. I'm not saying which is the right approach. But to me, that is a classic visual about what is important to us in terms of capital planning. And if we're going to take Enfield and make it Lebanon, are we ready for the $1 billion to do that? And I made that number up. I have no idea what it cost.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think it's a good place to say, all right, we're not, as we say, okay, here are the subcommittees that are active, here are their charters, here are their members. On the capital front, we're not ready to pick it out of this whole group into a more dedicated group, and we are still working with the select board and the staff to get the right group when we pry it off. So let's say a next agenda, not some future agenda, but next agenda topic to be a capital planning, the elements of the capital plan, that matrix, that list in a brainstorm activity. Okay. Okay, good. All right. So then let me just look. Yeah, that's what I had under capital planning. All right. So
Jan,
Yeah, we're gonna end up.
I'm sorry. Yep.
I just had one more thing to kind of piggyback on I'm not sure if this is the time to talk about it. At the last meeting, there was discussion of combining the multimodal subcommittee into the capital planning.
Yes.
And I want to discuss how that looks now going forward with this new brainstorming plan, because I agree that there's, the multimodal is on a spectrum of very long-term goals that are going to cost a lot of money. And that definitely falls under the capital planning bucket, like sidewalks and everything like that. But then there's also the other side of smaller projects that are a lot faster timeline, quicker implementation. And that's still something that would be under a multimodal that would not be necessarily addressed by the capital planning.
Hey, Jan, I want to agree with Vince. Vince reminds me that there are planning grants available for transportation projects. So if I were to prioritize, I apologize for dropping the ball on this thought process, Vince, but I'm pleased to be reminded. It's important that we think about how we do the a shared use path from here to Hartford or whatever. Those could be some forefront items that if we're going to talk about capital planning, let's maybe bring forward things that we could get grant assistance for.
How do we, I'm back to the process question a little bit, because I don't want to end up with 5 or 6 official subcommittees with warned meeting minutes and so forth. So I'm trying to, I think 3 or 4 is probably a good number, and you shouldn't need the tool necessarily for more than that. But the kind of thing that's being talked about, where it may be one interested party, it may be 1 or 2, it may be one person on the committee and one person who's not. How do we see that getting things like that done in between full PC, but not a subcommittee, but 1 or 2 people? Jeff?
Yeah, the Bike Ped Committee, Lucy Gibson chaired it for a long time. I don't remember the total number of people. We had anywhere from like 7 to 14 people that might show up. But like the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, it was a continuum of what are the projects we're interested in, and to the extent we have an interest. For instance, we did get a grant from VTrans for a shared use path from Norwich to Hartford until I'm going to say hypothetically, a town manager said, I'm going to let it go because I don't want to do that project. I'm not saying good or bad, but that committee kept throwing forward projects dealing with the RPCs. And then informing the planning commission, select board, et cetera, and staff about those specific needs.
So how does, what are our options for, you know, an interested party? Because so Vince is a member of the planning commission. He's also a town resident, you know, you can have town residents that want to, there's certainly, you know, Peter Orner and the crew trying to do a Beaver Meadow thing. I'm just trying to get my head around what are, how might we support good efforts that don't necessarily need to be formal planning commission subcommittees, but we're helping motivated people do what they want to do. And
Right.
that may just be get out of their way, or it may be, you know, we need to be more formal because we're a town group.
At our next meeting, we could put bike ped on the list. And as we're contemplating the broader things that Mary sort of highlighted, we could say, maybe this rises to the top, and if so, maybe we take a different look at that.
And I mean,
Because
all of
there's-
these issues are, oh, sorry, they're all capital issues, right? Ultimately. If so, we're gonna do the capital budget, it does become part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, and that's, you know, that's how we got there, Vince. That's how we, you know, so kindly absorbed your subcommittee while you were away.
yeah, but Jan, what's really, and I just thank Vince so much, and I want to apologize again. There's 80-20 money out there for stuff like this, sometimes 90-10.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's a good point, Vince, and we don't want to drop it. It'll be in the brainstorm as we look at capital, and then if there's some specific piece of any of these topics, multimodal being one that people are interested in, then we'll leave some of it in capital, and if it's got enough kind of independent existence, then we pull it apart and figure out how to move other pieces.
That sounds good.
All right, Ernie? You gotta get off mute.
Muted again.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying basically that there could be groups and projects that sort of fall outside of what the planning commission is charged with doing, either because they're very particular and focused, or, and I'm thinking that's probably the biggest identifier of
Yeah.
things. About 35 years ago, when I was on the natural resources inventory group, I think that was sort of, for want of a better term, I don't know how that committee even existed, because it wasn't part of the planning commission, it wasn't part of the conservation commission. You know, we came in, we would sort of do this work, mapping kind of work, and it struck me that it was just a committee that the select board must have constituted for this purpose. You know, and to this day, we use information that group did, you know, all that time ago. So I'm thinking that, you know, we may have to just also figure out how we're going to work with the select board to have them, so that we can get them to, when somebody has a good idea, and it should be pursued, at least looked at, and, you know, it's part of it, you know, and capital planning will have to be involved eventually. You know, or maybe we'll have already set aside the money for it if we thought it was a good enough idea. You know, we'll have to figure out how to work with with the select board to get them to constitute new committees that will last for some period of time until a certain project is actually completed.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is that they're working on. And
Yeah.
I don't see it, you know, the planning, I'm not saying that. The select board is, you know, able to constitute any number of panels, whatever
Groups,
you wanna
yeah. So let's do this. Let's leave it as the next useful step in the capital planning piece is for this group to do a big picture brainstorming activity. That'll be comprehensive, and then we'll see elements that either really feed into discussions with the select board, can be fed into a capital planning subcommittee, or spin off as projects. but let's do the broad comprehensive brainstorm and let that start the landscape. Christian?
It seems to me that, a brainstorming, you really don't have brainstorming sessions. You're gonna have to have either a whole pile of them, which will actually take a lot of time before we get the brainstorming actually to produce something. Or, I've been on, I'm gonna call them retreats. They really aren't. And I mean, I even did something with Tuck one time. How you brainstormed
Yeah,
certain
yeah.
business types of things. And I think that, we may want to think about someday setting aside like a Saturday or a Sunday to really hash things out. Because the 2 hours that we have, I often feel that stuff gets left unsaid. And by the time we have a month goes by and we've got another agenda, some of the stuff that was important at that one has gotten forgotten,
Yeah.
and we end up not addressing it, and then all of a sudden somebody say, "Oh, I forgot that was what we were supposed to be doing." And I think that this is important enough to warrant some kind of special treatment, because it really is sort of the overview of everything we do, and we should be able to we should be allowed to work it out and hash it out completely, like in one place at one time, so that we don't forget things and we get through the whole thing.
Okay, so I hear you, Ernie. I want to keep us moving. I saw Christian's hand up, and then we need some time for the solar siting subcommittee. Christian?
I guess I'm a little uncertain. Is the vision that this group would generate ideas and then bring those to town staff to actually generate the planning, the capital, the document itself, the budget, the capital plan? Or is it that's something that would be drafted by this group in concert with? And the bylaws are like very vague, make it seem as though it's like presented to this committee then reviews the comments on it and then passes it back.
Yeah, without belaboring this, John, ideally it would be collaborative. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a town manager select board document with respect to budget type issues, which doesn't necessarily constrain us. Like the Marion Cross School Saturdays and Sundays, we used to have these day-long events with the town, would bring everybody in for food and planning discussions. So that's going to hopefully be the evolution of what Ernie just said.
Yeah. So I think, Christian, that as I see it, it's a big topic that clearly we want to get plenty of town staff involvement and select board. We're talking about everything from police cars to Tracy Hall and culverts and so on. And so there's a huge piece that's town staff, department heads putting things in the pile. And so I do think the exercise for us is to say what is uniquely in that comprehensive. If we just said, yep, we're doing it right. We've got all the department heads engaged. We've got town staff engaged. We've got the select board thinking, budgeting, and policy. What is the unique contribution to that process of the planning commission, translating the residents' desires into a town plan, and then the capital elements of that town plan. And that's our part. How do we play that part? But I get to Ernie's point, and then we will move on. In terms of making the best use of our time, if we're doing something, call it a brainstorm or call it make a list of what we mean by capital planning effort. I would encourage anyone and everyone to make that list in the next week while something's fresh bouncing around, or just start a list tomorrow and run it for the next 2 weeks. Oh, Tracy Hall, oh, this, oh, there, culverts, and then send them all in and we'll put them in the packet and we'll get, 30% along the way before we even open the meeting. Because I agree that we need to figure out ways to use our 2 hours each meeting as efficiently as possible. So let's leave that for now, and we'll you'll see it on the agenda when we're planning the next agenda. So then solar siting subcommittee. Now we do have a process topic for this, which is specifically the person who was leading that subcommittee is no longer on that subcommittee. So we need a new lead for that. Now, typically we had the subcommittee itself choose their own lead. There's a little bit of bootstrapping required here in the sense that something like tomorrow or Thursday at the latest, we need an agenda for the meeting on the 21st, which would be the exercise of the lead. So we need, that's worth talking about a little bit. And then if there are any other members, or if we want to pick a lead, we may be able to jumpstart that process.
Yeah, as a point of order, Jan, has Chris resigned officially?
I have not seen an official resignation from that subcommittee by Chris. She wasn't at the last meeting. That's all I could say for sure. And I did reach out to her after the select board meeting, and certainly welcomed her to stay on the committee and said I hoped she would, but I haven't heard anything.
Well, to that end, personally, whatever the committee, whoever constitutes the committee, I think should select its own leadership. I don't see the need to say who needs to lead it.
Okay. So for now, that's me, Ernie, and Mary. So I think maybe just quickly, if we, to my mind right now, we're talking about a meeting a week from tonight with the agenda to continue the discussion of town plan edits relative to solar siting. So, and then we can put on that agenda select lead as part of the subcommittee's charter. Is that?
Yeah, I'm personally not inclined to tell a subcommittee who needs to be in the lead unless there's a very specific reason to do that.
Okay. All right, so I can get Pam to do our agenda of just that, and that will put us
Have
in.
we gotten any conversation from the people? Have we gotten information from people in the comments?
I just got today, Mary Albert had asked when the deadline was for get something in the packet, and I had told her right after the last meeting, and today she just sent something in, a couple of pages with some edits, some suggestions. That's the only thing I know about, but I'd have to pulse Pam to be sure. Okay, so on we'll do that for the next meeting. I would just like to point out one update, because it's my personal response to something. I put it in the packet relative to the Upper Loveland project. And I just wanted you to know why it's in the packet and what the thinking was. So way back in early in our tenure here, probably in July of 23 or something like that, when we were reviewing the Upper Loveland project, I put together a chronology, a timeline for my purposes, and then in a somewhat naive fashion, put it into the packet for this group, which then makes it a public record. And it then took on a life of its own as material evidence in PUC filings and so on. Rather than me trying to keep that as the authoritative document on what happened when, I made a public comment to the PUC a week or so ago, which is in your packet, saying very specifically that that should not be considered material evidence, and that was not my intention in doing it. That caused a bit of a kerfluffle, and I would have preferred to have done it sooner, but I'm glad I did it eventually. And so right now, my understanding as of 4:30 this afternoon, the PUC has several more filings relative to this debate. It is between the PUC and Norwich Solar in terms of whether or not to reopen anything. There is currently nothing on the table as an order from the PUC to this group to act until they work out the back and forth with Norwich Solar. Jeff?
Yeah, as a point of order, I view this as correspondence and I'd like to move on.
Okay, that's fine with me. I wanted you to know why it was in there, and it related to a planning commission packet from the past, which is why I put it in our minutes, our packet. Mary?
I'd like to make a comment, and that is, I think that this document back in July 2023 was a document that held a lot of sway with this group in conversation. And it is now, and it was part of a discussion of a agenda item that Stuart Richards brought to the commission. But this document did hold a lot of sway with this group. It was presented really as very factual, when in fact there are very significant errors in it, one of which was confirmed a month later when the town attorney finally responded to a FOIA request, which confirmed that the June 29th packet, which Norwich Solar sent to Rod Francis, had never been shared with the Planning Commission and had never seen that document. So that document that Jan shared was really critical in my experience with the decision-making of the PUC, of the Planning Commission in July last year. And now it's been weaponized by Norwich Solar. And so I really appreciate Jan clarifying that it was not intended for that purpose. But, and I think there have been some additional comments to clarify that there are some errors in it that have been now weaponized. But it was weaponized in two ways. One, by saying that this is what happened, which it wasn't what happened. And secondly, that based on that, the Planning Commission made a decision that a decision in not to relook at the case. So I just want to be on record in saying that this was a very unfortunate document, and I think it really makes sense that it makes all of us have to really be careful about what we put forward in plans, because they can be used in ways that are have significant impact. Thank you.
Yeah, and I certainly learned a lesson from the experience. Jeff?
Yeah, I'd like to move on. If there's a reason to bring this up as an agenda item in the future, I may not agree with Mary, but I'm not going to debate her in this forum because it's not an agenda item. So this is the wrong place in my mind to have this discussion.
There was no
That's fine.
comment at the beginning. There was a time for public comment, and Jan, you skipped that. So I don't know if there's anybody
True.
in the public who would like to make any comments.
Yeah, at this point, unless they're in the room, there's nobody else. Oh, Jay is here. But let's move. We'll have a time for comment at the end, and I'm sorry I did miss that. But so as it stands right now, May 14th today was the deadline for the PUC to take comments on the open question. They've gotten some comments. They're now mulling it, and we will stay tuned for developments. So now I'd like to jump into the subcommittee work, the meat of it. And Mary, I think you're the one that's driving this, so maybe it'd be best if you gave a quick update of town plan edits exercise and where we got to and how you think that's going.
Thank you. So I hope people could have an opportunity, if you're interested, to go to the solar site minutes, and you can see the work that was done. I was able to translate the town plan to a Word document, and then I went through it after reviewing a number of other town plans to look at how they think about regulatory impact. And this is a solar group. So we were looking at solar. I would say it's kind of looking at energy, but solar in particular, and looking at how, where are the areas where the town is intent or is where the town plan really wants to say, this is if we're going to make a rubric for, we talked about this, what is our charge when we're looking at a solar plan of 150 to 500, like what are we looking for and what are the kind of the regulatory guidelines that we need to have in place? So if you would think that at the, the end of rewriting this town plan, we would pull out a rubric and say, when upper Loveland Solar comes, or when the Lampere project comes, what are we looking for? We would be able to go into the town plan and say, here are the items. So I went in as a first swing and just said and highlighted areas where we might edit it. Annette Smith was invited by she came to a solar siting meeting and gave a presentation to the group that was very well received by members of the Planning Commission as well as members of the public who were there. She gave a lot of clarity, factual information. And so I sent it to Annette, and she further edited it, some changing some things back from mine, and et cetera. So we did that first pass at this document, all with track changes. And then in the follow-on meeting, we went through it page by page with members of the community, talking about, what was being proposed, inviting their comment both at the meeting as well as inviting them to send any written comments along afterwards. But I think it's fair enough that it kind of ginned up a good discussion about what are the intentions and how do we ensure that the town plan reflects those intentions so that there's clarity rather than ambiguity, and that where there are areas where there might be conflict, that we resolve that conflict. So a couple of examples. For example, it talked about steep slopes. It didn't define what a steep slope is throughout the whole sometimes I can't remember whether the zoning says it's 25% and the town plan didn't. So let's just make that consistent. So in some cases it was just very clear, clarifying in that way, and in others it was trying to nail down what is it we really mean. And there'll be differences of opinion about that. And so we are, that's why we want to get comments from people.
Yeah. And just to add to that, as from being there, I would say, roughly speaking, the subcommittee might be half the way through the first run through those edits with the public comments we were getting. So I would expect us to take the meat of next week's meeting to keep slogging through it, and then maybe it's one more meeting to turn around into something digestible to feedback to this full group. It's that kind of status would be how I see it. Jeff?
Yeah, a couple comments. First, thanks for all the heavy lifting, to the committee, Mary, that you all are doing to try and synchronize elements of our current town plan with state policy. I think for me, working with different solar companies, I want to use the 25% steep slope question that was brought up as an example. We're dealing with a substantial solar company in the region that installs panels on 2 helical piers. They're 2 inches in diameter or less, 2-inch in diameter or less helical piers that are driven in the ground with a panel placed on top. So there's virtually no ground impact. So there should be no slope consideration. Slope considerations have historically related to erosion sediment control. So once we get presented with all this, it would be wonderful to be able to talk about technology versus the real elements of this, so we don't have a faux zoning overlay that impedes the potential for, say, solar energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a conversation around different elements of technology and technology progress. Specifically, what are the acreage per megawatt requirements of panels now versus panels in the future? So I think that will be one of the challenges of, drafting a 7-year town plan or changing a plan with a moving target of some of these technologies, but it's, that's the challenge we got to step up to. So in terms of updating this group, I would say there's a good chunk of work going on. Please read the minutes. And probably it's something on the order of, probably not next meeting, but maybe the one after that of this group. The solar subcommittee would come back and ask for a chunk of time to really be able to present something. Okay. Why don't we, I would like to, we have 2 sets of minutes to approve, but I would, and we have public comment at the end. So let's bang through the minutes so that we have time for public comment.
I'd like to make a motion to approve both sets of minutes.
That's, Pam reminded me that I think that February 13th was the special hearing we had on Lamperti, I think, and then the April 9th. So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Bob, thank you. Any discussion on those 2 sets of minutes? All right, all those in favor of approving minutes of February 13th and April 9th?
Aye.
All right, we'll call Christian and abstain.
Yeah, Christian wasn't there, correct, and Mary.
I was not there at the first one, at the Long
February,
Hair one.
yep, February
Okay.
13th, yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you for that, sorry.
Okay, so I'll get the
Two
voting correctly
abstains
on that.
Yep, okay. With that, I would take any public comment for items that weren't on the agenda. Jay? Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I just, first of all, it was great observing the meeting, and I really appreciate the rigor that you all are looking towards for the process, both with this group and with the subcommittees. I think one of the things, and Mary, what you were saying at the end about a rubric is, and I feel in light of all the solar, there's sort of, to me, just 2 questions, regardless of where you sit on the individual issues. Is one, are all the facts on the table and people have the same facts yet are interpreting them differently, which is, I think, what our goal is ultimately, is everyone has the same sheet of music, even though I may be off key and you aren't. And number 2 is how we can create a system as a town to have clarity on how something is going to be interpreted. And so I encourage that not only on the solar, but some of the capital planning topics, the housing topics that you're talking about. The more that we can do as a community to try to lay out how we want to be looking at an issue. And Jeff, your last point of changing technology is really key. So what is it that's important, and how do we have a consistent way of looking at issues with the knowledge that some of the facts may change? But I think it's getting the facts out there and how you interpret the most important. So I appreciate listening, and keep it up. And I from my joining this meeting now 3 or 4 times, I really feel you guys are heading in a good direction for this town. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Jay. Any other comments for tonight?
Make
All
a
right.
motion to adjourn.
We've got a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Ernie? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, it's a beautiful evening. Enjoy. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.